The Great War, a world in flames. It started with a spark. One moment. One gunshot. June 28, 1914, Sarajevo, Bosnia. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and his wife Sophie, rode through the streets in an open car, waving to the crowd. Then, chaos. A young Serbian nationalist, Gavrilo Princip, stepped forward, raised his pistol, and fired. In seconds, the world shifted. The assassination set off a storm. Austria-Hungary, furious and determined to crush Serbia, issued an ultimatum, impossible demands meant to provoke war. Serbia refused to comply entirely. 1 month later, on July 28, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. The dominoes began to fall. Russia, seeing itself as the protector of the Slavs, mobilized its army to defend Serbia. Germany, Austria's ally, saw this as a threat and declared war on Russia. France, bound to Russia, entered the war. Germany, executing the Schlieffen Plan, invaded Belgium to strike at France, and in doing so, violated Belgium's neutrality. Britain, honoring its pledge to Belgium, declared war on Germany. Within a matter of weeks, nearly all of Europe was engulfed in conflict. The war was unlike anything the world had seen. This was not a war of swift victories and heroic charges. No, this was a war of mud, of steel, of blood. The Western Front, a graveyard of men. In France and Belgium, the Western Front solidified into a brutal stalemate. Trench warfare became the grim reality, deep ditches stretching for miles, filled with exhausted soldiers, waiting for the next barrage of artillery. The space between enemy trenches, known as no man's land, was a killing field of barbed wire, shell craters, and bodies left to rot. Machine guns tore through advancing troops like scythes through wheat. Poison gas, a new horror of war, crept over the trenches, choking men, burning their lungs. Tanks, a new invention, rumbled onto the battlefield, but progress was slow. Each major offensive claimed tens of thousands of lives, yet the front barely shifted. The Battle of Verdun, 300 days of relentless combat, nearly 1 million casualties. The Somme, one of the bloodiest battles in history, where on the first day alone, Britain suffered 57,000 casualties. And yet, despite all the death, the war dragged on. The Eastern Front, a war of movement. Meanwhile, in the east, the war was more fluid. The Russian army, vast but poorly equipped, fought the Germans and Austrians across the endless landscapes of Poland, Ukraine, and the Balkans. But Russia was collapsing from within. The people were starving, morale was shattered, and in 1917, revolution erupted. The Tsar was overthrown, and soon after, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power. Russia withdrew from the war, signing the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, allowing Germany to focus all its forces on the Western Front. New enemies, new hope. Just as Germany saw a glimmer of victory, a new power entered the war. The United States, long neutral, had been watching. But Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking civilian ships, including the Lusitania, which carried American passengers, pushed the U.S. closer to war. The final straw came with the Zimmermann telegram, a secret message from Germany to Mexico, promising land in exchange for attacking the U.S. When this was exposed, America had had enough. In April 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. Fresh American troops poured into Europe, young and full of energy, unlike the weary, war-torn soldiers of Europe. With them came supplies, weapons, and a new sense of hope. The tide began to turn. The final act, collapse of the Central Powers. By 1918, Germany was exhausted. Their last desperate offensive, the Spring Offensive, failed to break through Allied lines. And then, the counterattack came. The 100 Days Offensive, relentless Allied attacks, pushing the Germans back day by day. One by one, Germany's allies collapsed. The Ottoman Empire surrendered. Austria-Hungary crumbled, its empire disintegrating into revolution. Then, Germany itself began to fall apart. Protests and strikes erupted at home. Soldiers mutinied. The Kaiser, once seen as unshakable, saw his empire slipping away. On November 9, 1918, he abdicated and fled to the Netherlands. 2 days later, on November 11, at exactly 11 a.m., an armistice was signed. The guns fell silent. The war was over. The aftermath, a broken world. But peace came at a cost. Over 16 million people, soldiers and civilians, had died. Cities were in ruins. An entire generation was lost. And the Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, imposed crushing penalties on Germany: territory lost, military reduced, reparations demanded. The world had hoped this was the war to end all wars. But the bitterness left behind, the unresolved tensions, the scars of battle, these would not be forgotten. The Great War had ended, but in its ashes, the seeds of an even darker conflict were already being sown.